All right, guys. Thanks for joining me once again on a Ask Me Anything live stream. We are back on our regular Tuesday night schedule, which I try to hit as much as possible moving forward. I'm really sorry for the fact that it's been a couple weeks, and it was really just a number of different things. Scheduling on my part, scheduling on other parts. Weather came up once, and just some activism training events I think I was doing that ended up overlapping the times that I would normally have a live stream. So whatever happened, this has been one of the longest gaps I know that we've had recently, at least since the holidays, on having a live stream. So I apologize for that. I know since I was out there doing a variety of activism training events that I heard directly from many of you who do seem to enjoy these live streams, and that feedback is always pretty helpful to me. I've also happened to run into quite a few of you guys out there at Costco or Fred Meyer or Safeway and a number of other places at the gas station that are coming up to me, people I've never met before, but obviously you watch me on the YouTube channel or you see me in the live stream, and introducing yourself, please feel free to do that, and don't ever feel awkward. I actually feel pretty humbled by the fact that people do approach me in public and tell me how much they like these live streams or videos. And so I do appreciate that feedback. It's a lot more real than just talking to a camera in a studio. So it's something that I do appreciate. I have been doing a lot more just in the last couple weeks. I know I've been all over the state doing some training. I'll be doing that moving forward. But I figured I'd probably start today's show out, in addition just kind of getting the cobwebs out of the system before we jump into the Ask Me Anything questions, which I can see you guys are already starting to get a number of them up here. To just go over real quickly on some of the schedule that I do have. People ask me about this too, and I've promised in the past that I would tell you when I had some events coming up. So if it happens to be near you, it's going to be relatively easy for you to go to those events and actually see me in person and come up and chat with me and hear me speak, see if I'm that much different when I'm speaking in front of an audience as I am on the camera. The next one that I have on my calendar, and I haven't gone back and double checked this again, so if somebody's watching from Okanagan, I'm going to assume that I'm still on the calendar out there, but I have a March 8th Okanagan Lincoln Day dinner scheduled, so that's coming up not too long from now, and so I'll be there, and I believe that I'm the main speaker there. I don't think I'm the MC at that event. If I am the MC, though, I guess you'll be seeing me even more than you want to in Okanagan on March 8th. On March 12th, I know I'm going to be at the Reset Church in Marysville with the 38th Legislative District Republicans, and I think that's generally been an open invite for all of the Snohomish County Republicans up there if you want to come on by. I anticipate that being a pretty interactive event with a lot of questions and audience interaction, especially in regards to what you can do as an activist to make an impact in Washington State. On March 29th, I am currently scheduled to be speaking at the Clark County Lincoln Day dinner down in Vancouver, Washington. And I have to tell you, this was a little bit of a screw up on my scheduling part. I'm actually taking one of my daughters out to look at a college that week, and I had to modify my travel schedule to make sure I was back to be here in time for that, because I know if you were in Grays Harbor, that Grays Harbor Republicans had asked me to also speak in that day, and I just assumed I'd be with my daughter, and I had forgotten that I'd already put this on the calendar. So I was able to scramble back in time for the Clark County Lincoln Day dinner. I am not trying to give Grays Harbor a hard time. It just happens to be that I did have that commitment, so I had to find a way to make that work. And if you do live in Grays Harbor and you guys have another event coming up, I'm happy to come out there. I love going out to Grays Harbor. It's close to my house. It's not hard for me to get there, but just scheduling wise, I'll be in Clark County that evening. And I sure hope my plane flights are on time that day. Also, on April 12th, I'll be at the Kitsap County Lincoln Day dinner, speaking there as well. I know I've been the MC there before. I might help out a little bit with the program. And on May 3rd, I'll be at the Skagit County Lincoln Day dinner, where I believe Brian Haywood's going to be the primary speaker that day, and I'm filling in kind of a secondary speaker role there, and maybe doing some MC stuff. I'm not sure what they exactly need. I just know that I got signed up for that. There's a variety of other events that I'm doing around the state between now and then, mostly having to do with candidate training, activism training, and other types of organizational activism sort of work. Those are usually smaller groups of people that are pre-selected by groups in the community, depending on where I'm going, whether it's Spokane or Ellensburg or Mason County or wherever. And if you want me to do one of those, then make sure you kind of reach out to me at Glenn at We the Governed. Just make contact so I can kind of fit it into the schedule. I try to do as many of those as I can around the state as possible. This is kind of a good time of year to do that. We still, despite the fact and the chaos of the legislative session that's going on right now, this is really the time of year when a lot of people who try to make a difference in their community are trying to recruit candidates or train candidates or get them more involved or engaged. I encourage you, if you haven't looked at the interviews that I posted last week on the channel with a Linwood school board member and with a number of other, just some other school board focused sort of interviews. I had done those up in Snohomish County. They actually drove down and met me up there, and I was able to record a couple interviews. And I haven't been doing as many of those lately as I want. I've been trying to do some more, but I thought they were pretty insightful for people who are considering running for the school board right now and just understanding the impact you can have with WASDA, the WIAA, and the genuine good I think that you can have getting into the school board and trying to hold back some of the more crazier ideas that come out of Chris Reichel's office at OSPI. So let's get into this. It is we're in the middle of the legislative session, which has basically become the equivalent of a child's tantrum writ large in a legislative format with lots of crazy and weird bills and absurd bills that have been proposed by particularly the Democrats this cycle. There are some good bills that have been proposed. Most of those don't seem to be the ones getting hearings. And so the chaos of the legislative session is producing great headlines, high drama. Jamie Peterson, the Senate Majority Leader out of Seattle, seems to have really gotten a lot of national attention, which he truly deserved for being basically saying that parents don't deserve to have any knowledge about what they being the school district or they being medical providers do to their kids in secret, and that keeping the parents out of it is kind of something he thinks is a good idea. And I know all the back and forth drama there with the mature minor doctrine that's been on the books for a while, and then of course this reinterpretation of genital mutilation and drugs that can be given to kids to prevent puberty, and life-changing decisions that many adults in this state seem to think that kids who are 13 years old would have the ability to make those decisions. But by God, they better not work for DOGE, because if you're too young working for DOGE, you're not allowed to actually dig into corruption and incompetence and other bad behavior at the federal government level. So it's been kind of a weird and odd drama just looking at all that stuff moving forward. I did 2 videos that I was able to record today. One of them is going to be about the Department of Licensing and the inevitable I believe, federal investigation and drama that's probably coming down on their heads before too long in the state, and the significant ramifications of that impact. I thought I did a pretty good job with that video, so I'm hoping to launch that one tomorrow. Also did another video about how to quantify and categorize the variety. There's really about a 3-platform types of bills that the Democrat majority has proposed this cycle, and it's produced these weird political hills that for some reason they seem to be willing to die on, which isn't the kind of thing that I would normally think would be a wise political move. But then again, I'm not a Democrat, and I don't necessarily understand some of the approaches that they've been taking lately with the bills that they seem to be prioritizing in the hearings. Now, that being said, every time, and I've discussed this many times before, every legislative session you get about 3,000-ish or so bills that get proposed ultimately, and only about 500 of them become law. Most of those are boring bills that don't have a lot of drama attached to them. They're relatively minor tweaks to the system, making the Evergreen State a permanent and official recognition, even though it's been our nickname for decades. whose name goes on what building, various small things. That is actually the majority of legislation that ends up on the governor's desk. That's generally not too controversial. However, there's always some high drama pieces that have big impacts, in particular the ones that we're going to be paying attention to are those that restrict our freedoms and increase our taxes and make life more miserable for everybody except for the grifter class in Olympia. So it's kind of worth paying a lot of attention to what's going on, but also there's a falling out process that's occurring right now where some of the particularly stupid ideas that have been proposed are probably going to be dropping off the legislative process. Now that technically they're still alive for one more legislative session in a year because you have a 2-year legislative part-time session that the legislature has. We're in the long session right now, which is 120 days versus the shorter session. So you're going to be seeing a lot more proposed this time, and you're still a couple years away from the election cycle. And usually during the short session, most people in both parties don't want to have the high drama. For the most part, they don't want the high drama, high political price to pay sort of bills that go on the legislative agenda at that point in time. And on top of that, you got the complexity of Bob Ferguson, who does seem to be one of the rare adults in the room on the Democrat side. That's the facade that he's putting forward anyway right now, only in contrast to just the absurdity of some of the legislators in Olympia. It's actually been pretty odd to watch. And it's been an amazing experience looking at the impact that we're seeing out of D.C. as the cynic in me always has been opposed to most of what I see coming out of Washington, D.C. It's a whiplash sort of effect to actually feel like good things can be coming out of D.C., and good things in this case being defined as downsizing of just the bloat, the corruption, the grifting operations, the kickback schemes, the fraud, the waste, and abuse that seems to be exposed on a daily basis by the DOGE crew. We are living in amazing times to actually be seeing this come about. If you look back on the Reagan administration and ever read the book Sagebrush Rebel, where they talked about trying to come in and make some of these they had the same recognition as to some of the weaknesses and the problems with government. And you read the stories about how the administrative state and the grifting class and everybody colluded to prevent the Reagan administration from being able to make those changes back in the 80s as much as they wanted to. And even before that, if you go back to Coolidge's time in the 20s when they were trying to make a similar effort of downsizing government, there's some real interesting history in those efforts and those times in the past. And we seem to be living through one right now that's a lot more successful, at least in the initial stages, of getting the exposure out there on some of the corruption. So this is, for those of us who care about smaller government and limited government, this is a very unique scenario and a very unusual situation to be in. So let's just jump right in here. You're going to see the comments or questions like this one down below. When I'm answering them, I will be if you happen to log in midstream, you're going to see that this is the question I'm theoretically trying to answer. Even though I do tend to sometimes go off on tangents, generally I'm trying to keep posted up on the screen the question that I'm going to try to answer at that point in time. And normally it makes it a little bit easier too if you can see things like this where somebody says @we the governed down below. That makes it just a little bit easier for me to pick it out of the list. A lot of times there's so many there's commentary back and forth between people that are commenting on the program, which is totally fine. But I have a hard time spotting and picking out those questions. And I don't mean to skip over anybody's question. I just need to be able to find it sometimes as all the questions are scrolling up on the side. You can see these questions for yourself depending on how you look at the screen. I think it's on this side of the screen for most of you. Depending on whether you're looking at this on your phone, you might see it down below. But for now, let's just jump right into one of these questions. Again, it's an Ask Me Anything show. It doesn't mean that I have the answer or that I will necessarily answer the question the way you want, but I will do my best to try to answer the questions that you post. And I will try not to get off topic too much from the questions that you post here. First question here is from John Morgan. Now, I don't think we're related, but let me know if you think we are. How can we hold them, which is politicians, civilly and financially responsible for their actions besides elections? Great question. Most of the time, when a politician comes in and screws up and does something really dumb, bad, or destructive to the community, they generally don't have any civil or criminal, at least not financially direct impacts on them for those poor choices and bad decisions. Part of it is that there's been a fear historically in local government in particular, but even at the federal level, where you see how the system was weaponized against Trump. But there's always been a fear. The founding fathers, I think, shared this fear, and the political class over the years has at times, because elected officials have gone out and had to stick their necks out to make decisions that in hindsight turned out to be good decisions, but were risky at the time. A couple examples here. When Jefferson decided for the Louisiana Purchase, which was really clearly outside the scope of his duties and responsibilities in the way they understood them at the time. Lincoln certainly ran into a number of these scenarios, unprecedented scenarios in American history that he had to deal with. Theodore Roosevelt also ran into these situations. Numerous presidents, for good and bad, basically exceeded what would be the traditional authority, the historic authority that the president had at that time. And, there was always some fear that they would be held personally responsible if those decisions turned out to be mistakes. You can't always know that it's not going to be a mistake. So generally, there's been a resistance in our country to weaponizing the legal system to be able to go after elected officials for just being dumb and making bad mistakes. If they did that, every politician that we have in America would be in prison, and we'd never find another one out there, because the inevitability is that if you're going to be making decisions there, you're probably going to make some mistakes. The question is, how do you at least try to have some guardrails on what's an obvious bloated administrative state? One of the critiques that we've had for a long time in government, I mean, this is something I remember talking about with my friends in college, and I remember when I was working at the Freedom Foundation, it was always a debate topic that we would have on trying to, how do you control the bloat of government and hold them accountable? There's small practical things that you can do that clearly hold them accountable. I mean, one of the things that's worth doing, and I would suggest that this is a good research project this year, is to look at how many elected officials at the higher office, so the state Senate, state House, for example, how many of them actually have side businesses, side hustles, or their spouse has a business that directly profits and benefits from government. A shocking percentage of them, by the way, a much larger percentage than most people realize. And they clearly, even though they may not directly have influence on making a decision that they vote on specifically on the floor that comes back to reward them directly, oftentimes these rewards do occur with legislation that comes out of Olympia. And they obviously are going to have some influence, and the money happens to conveniently be steered in their direction. I think that if you want to have a financial impact on the political class if they're doing bad things, you take away the gravy train, the grifting gravy train that's coming their way. That's probably the biggest impact financially, truthfully, that you could ever possibly have on them, is just cutting off that grifting train. That's why they're so freaked out about what Elon Musk and the DOGE crew is doing back in DC, because by shining the light of day on what's going on in places like USAID or USDA or the Department of Education, just absolute fraudulent, just squandering of resources and waste, and worse than that, when they're actually using that money to fund destructive activities or essentially set up operations that are, basically just political entities that are designed to help with the re-election of the politicians in office, I think, or coordinating with the media and the censorship operations, so silencing your enemies. All that kind of stuff being exposed right now, that's a big deal. It's a huge deal. We've known that it's been going on for decades. That just to have it, though, finally getting somebody in there willing to expose this and show how this money train's really going with the receipts and seeing who's getting the money, it's a big deal. It's a unique time to be alive. And to a lesser extent, the same thing's going on in Washington State. Same thing could be going on in your county and your city as well. It's not unusual, unfortunately, and exposing that is, and by the way, it's not just the elected officials, it's also the senior bureaucrats. So looking at the senior bureaucrats, I really believe that we need to change our financial disclosure laws in the state to require financial disclosure statements for all upper-level bureaucrats in all agencies, not just a couple of the political appointees, but straight down into superintendents of school districts and managers of counties and cities. It's one of the reforms that I would recommend from a transparency standpoint. Then the second question comes into what are maybe less significant ways that you can financially impact somebody who's doing bad things. There's two parts of state law that allow you to impose fines and penalties. When I say you, it's not you, the citizen, imposing them, but the law allows for penalties to be imposed on those politicians or PACs or entities. One is the Public Disclosure Commission, and many people who follow my website know that I've been responsible for about $646,000 of the fines issued against politicians and judges and other PACs and political party subgroups and all over the state of Washington for the last many years now. I think I'm up to 116, I think, that have been fined in cumulative total, plus a bunch of sanctions that have been imposed on them, which is just formal recognition of violations as being lawbreakers. That's one way. Another thing is the Open Public Meetings Act, which actually allows for fines, personal fines, on elected officials, and those fine levels were increased recently if they violate the Public Meetings Act. It is not as easy as you think to necessarily document that. The violations are common and frequent. It's just your ability to legally prove that to the point where those fines would be issued. It's a little trickier, it takes some skill and effort, but it can be done, and those are ways you can do it. But frankly, the most important thing is to really expose the truth about what's going on with your political class and make sure that information is spread far and wide. So John, I don't know, by the way, your face looks familiar to me in the sense that if that's actually your photo, let me know if you're the guy who ran for office in the 20th Ledge District a couple years ago. And if not, that's fine. For some reason, that name is an easy one for me to remember. Oh, by the way, sorry, I skipped over this. Blue Jay. Today I received 2 messages from Chimacum, Washington about women's marriage, name not on their birth certificate, so they won't be able to vote. And then it asks if you want to talk to Perez. That just sounds like a political messaging thing that's going on. Somebody, I'm assuming, probably the Democrats in the 3rd Congressional District are probably running some kind of political campaign out there right now, a messaging campaign, and that's probably what you're getting. I'm not familiar with any actual restrictions going on in Washington State that would ever have any impact on anybody's right to vote. We register illegals, we register non-U.S. citizens, we register people 10, 15 times. Our voter rolls are so screwed up, and the problem isn't that you can't vote, it's that usually somebody else is probably able to vote for you, or that you've been registered so many times to vote. The question is, which one should you vote on? It's kind of a ridiculous scenario. I've gotten into these details in the past, but anyway, that's just my sense on that, and that's probably what you're seeing right there. Brian, always good to hear from you. Now that we have a Team Trump and a majority in both houses, what do you now think about the red counties in Washington forming a new state by seceding from the blue Washington? Well, I kind of think that process, I mean, it's quite a legal process to go through if you've ever done the research on it. The 51st state effort, which has been something that has been considered a number of times in different states. California has gone down this road many times, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, Florida in the past, other states as well. But we haven't ever broken away a state like that into a separate state since West Virginia during the Civil War. So it's been 160 years plus, that we've even considered going down that path. So 170 years, I guess, but it really hasn't been the part of it's because it requires a lot of things to line up legally. You'd have to have a bunch of DC guys, Congress would have to agree to create a new state, essentially is what would happen. And it would take a lot more than just a majority. I mean, you'd really need a dominant percentage to probably end up going down that road. Very difficult to do, particularly if it's only benefiting one political party. Historically, when they've allowed new states in, they've oftentimes done it in situations where the perception is the Republicans are getting a state and the Democrats are getting a state. The big thing would be the Senate. That's going to be the main focus, because each new state that gets pulled up, and so this is a two-part question, really, because part of it's create a new state, part of it's just joining another state. The movement in Eastern Oregon has been mostly to join with Idaho, and that's the one that's gotten more news lately. The movement in Florida or California has been mostly split into different states. The movement in Illinois has mostly been a split into different state. Washington has historically, the Eastern Washington effort, the most recent one, has been mostly to have a separate state. But they would also probably look at joining with Idaho if they could. So what I'm thinking that's going to probably slow that process down a little bit might also be the big announcement that I've mentioned before on this channel, and I've done some videos about it, but it seems to be actually moving forward a little bit, which is federal election reform. Federal election reform is going to have a significant change to Washington state elections and the political experience that you have in our state. Quite a bit, I believe, moving forward. The recent announcement just a couple days ago with J.D. Vance was specifically focused on fixing, making Election Day a national holiday, having in-person voting everywhere, no more mail-in voting, showing ID when you vote, renewing your registration on a regular basis. This stuff, by the way, doesn't eliminate cheating. Please don't think it does, but it does change the nature of the process quite a bit. It probably does clean up the voter rolls quite a bit, at least for a while, and that impact in our state would be quite substantial. It is hard for me to totally predict, or anybody really to predict, what the outcome would be there, but my gut tendency is to believe that it would probably change the election for our Washington state legislature in both the House and the Senate, and probably 5 to 7 districts around the state, for the most part, in a way that would, on average, probably benefit Republicans a little bit more, which is why the Democrats would oppose any kind of voter reform in these states. But I believe with the transparency that you could potentially get out of that, it doesn't guarantee Republicans are going to win, but what it would do is it would at least level the playing field a little bit more and eliminate some of the points of risk that we currently have in our existing election system. So we'll have to see. The bigger impact, short term, that Trump's having right now, which is mostly through DOGE, I think, with just exposing, shining the light of day on all the corruption and the misuse of funds, and the weaponization of those funds, like through USAID or even the Department of Agriculture or any of these other agencies where the money is just diverted into these political activist organizations. That's a big deal. The Department of Interior, where they pulled back the $20 billion worth of money that was the famous throwing gold bricks off the deck of the Titanic story that you saw from Project Veritas, where they interviewed the guy who worked in the Biden administration, bragging about how they were going to toss all our tax dollars off the deck of the Titanic as the Biden administration presumably was sinking, so that their good friends on the left could get those gold bars and use them and weaponize the money against the rest of us. It seems like they've been able to recover a lot of that money and get it back. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on out there right now that's direct impact here. Let's see. Brian, good question. I wonder how, the second question you asked here, but I wonder how the 2A attacks in Washington affect private security contractors. And I wonder if all of us need to become private security contractors. I don't know, actually. It's a good question. I'm not clear on anything that's passed that makes a big impact or difference to somebody who might be considered a PSC versus just your regular citizen who has a concealed carry permit and wants to protect themselves, or at least be able to protect themselves on their property. So I'm not really sure how some of those attacks are going. One thing I would tell you is that if you care about the Second Amendment as much as I do, pay attention to what the Department of Justice appears to be looking at doing on 2A issues around the country and enforcing the federal, the Supreme Court rulings recently, which have generally been going towards favorable Second Amendment rulings for a long time now, getting that and then basically using the Department of Justice to go after states like Illinois, like Oregon, like Washington, and like California, like Colorado, like New Mexico, like other places like that, and basically forcing them to comply with the Supreme Court ruling on that. It's very different if the private folk have to keep filing these lawsuits, whether the Second Amendment Foundation or the Gun Owners of America or other local people. It's much fewer resources that we have to waste on that if the feds are going to come in and actually start to support our civil rights, including the Second Amendment. That changes things quite a bit. And I'm kind of interested to see how that impact is going to affect us here in Washington State, because obviously we've had a hostile governor to the Second Amendment. And, you know, listen, if you're looking at what the USAID documents exposed on all that money that was the billions of dollars that were going out of USAID, it's obvious a bunch of them were fed back through the Soros. You thought it was George Soros funding those operations, but a lot of our hostile Second Amendment either initiatives and or legislation was lobbied and pushed through by money that you and I paid for in our tax dollars through USAID that was just simply funneled through a George Soros group, and George Soros used federal tax dollars to come and take away our Second Amendment rights or attack them. And so rights are not taken away, but I mean, they're basically using legislation to weaponize it against us to attack us for our rights, not dissimilar from the censorship operations they've been running. So it's kind of a big deal, actually, I think. And so that's something that that would work. Let me talk about this here, because this made the news a little bit recently too. Clarin Yvald. So that is a new name for me here. But hi, Glenn and viewers. Quick check my math with proposed travel tax that violates 18th Amendment. 3 cents a mile, $30 per 10, $3 per 100, $30 per 1,000, $300 per 10,000. If we can't pay it, then what? Well, the travel tax, the mileage tax, the pay-per-mile tax, received a tremendous amount of very negative feedback from the public, like by 98% in opposition in Olympia. I cannot see that they're going to proceed with that level of stupidity, regardless of the desire of central planners or schemers to try to use something like that to control you. Even if they call it voluntary initially, we know what that means. It just seems like that's a dead deal. I can't see it really going anywhere. Thank you to everybody who signed in and testified against it. It was a massively overwhelming 20,000 people, I think, something like that. It was a large number of people that went in there and just pounded on the supporters of that dumb idea. And so it's really good if we can do that. Get that. When you go out there and respond that way, you may think that the politicians are ignoring you, and they're certainly going to put on an image like they are. And in this case, lately, when I say politicians, it's really been the Democrat majority in the two houses. They clearly appear to be trying to ignore you and anybody who has any common sense or believes math is real or can identify what a woman is in the state. Obviously, that's who they're ignoring and attacking with their legislation. But remember, their legislation, in my opinion, is basically functioning like a child's temper tantrum in an adult, presumably an adult legislature. And this is them acting out. Now, some of the acting out is because of what's going on in D.C. Some of it's because they're like, who is it? Schumer said they're taking away all our things. Well, what they're doing is they're losing a bunch of these grant grifting kickback schemes that fund not just their personal lifestyles, but they're also losing that money that's going into their partisan support structure that essentially funds their campaign teams and campaigns in the future. And so the concern there is losing political power and financial rewards personally, and that's why they're overreacting in the way that they are and getting crazy about it. So I do think it's important, though, for people to show up, as many of you did on this who are watching this, and intervene in the sense of, at least it doesn't take you very long. I've done a video on this. It takes you less than 2 minutes to log in and show your opposition to a specific piece of legislation. Do it quickly. I prefer people put in comments of some kind, but definitely go in and saying that's a dumb idea or it's bad or here's why it's bad. And I think you're making a bigger impact than you realize. Especially, you're going to see this as most of the worst and dumb ideas die before they ever get to Ferguson's desk. Now, Ferguson also has to pretend like he's a normal person and that he has some level of sanity, and part of this is his political aspirations for higher office. And so I would not count out the potential for Ferguson to veto dumb bills that land on his desk. I wouldn't count out either pre-negotiating with some of the Democrats in the legislature who need to show progress on stupid ideas and don't really care if they become law, but they want to make it seem like they're trying to make them become law, and having Inslee veto them so they can blame Inslee, and that basically makes them look like the adult in the room, and they still get to go back and suck their donors dry for more money to fight the good leftist fight that they've been engaging in for a while to get whatever that proposal is moved forward, whether that's taxing cow farts or banning wood stoves, whatever dream agenda that the Democrats seem to have for advancing what they call progress in our state. I don't think they're going to get the progress that they want, and what they're really looking at is losing a lot of what they have presumed was their right, which is your access to your tax dollars all along. And the change from the federal side being pushed down, surprisingly, in a way that actually shrinks government is so unusual. Those of us who care about liberty and freedom, we've never really seen anything like this. And so it's kind of a weird environment to be in when I'm just not used to seeing anybody doing anything good like this. So we'll just have to see. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff going on right now that daily that just seems to be going so fast and exposing so many things that it's going to have a big impact in our country and in our state. We're not immune to the impact. Let's see. I am skipping down. I do not see questions in a large series of comments, guys. But back down to, I'm trying to find one of the questions here. There's a ton of comments back and forth, guys. That's good. But here we go. Jason, I don't know why I didn't highlight. Oh, you misspelled "we the governed" there, by the way. That's why I didn't highlight it right now. So when you look down in the comment section, it didn't highlight it. That's why I almost missed your question there. So when are you going on Todd Herman's show? I used to listen to him when he lived in Seattle, and you were my favorite guest. Jason, thank you so much. I love being on Todd Herman's show. I've only been on his show a couple times since he's moved out to Idaho. He lives right across the border outside of Spokane. I've never, let me think about this. I think the last couple times I've done it remotely via Zoom. Although Todd and I have talked a few times, I would love to go out there and do an in-studio show with him at his place, and I might do that before too long. Todd, I love Todd. He's a great guy. He's a super, he's really got a very effective communication style, I think, and I'm very interested in engaging with him, particularly with the changes that we're seeing going on in Washington State as direct impact from some of these federal changes that just seem to be so amazing to witness. And the downsizing, I cannot, again, I feel like a broken record here, so I don't mean to sound too repetitive, but it is unique to see a time, probably none of us have been alive actually, where we've really seen a time in government where they're genuinely going in and really rooting out, corruption and exposing it so wide. I mean, the transparency part, please don't underestimate that. There's a ton of people, family members of mine, friends of mine, that are not as aware of some of the details that you and I might be, who, sure, they know government's incompetent and corrupt. Everybody does that interacts with it, but they don't necessarily know the depth and depravity of the corruption. And some people are being red-pilled right now just by seeing exactly how insane the money is being squandered and wasted that has been sent to these agencies. It's a big deal. So as that kind of explodes, I think, into public awareness, even though you're going to have places like 60 Minutes and the Seattle Times and all these others that try to conceal and hide and avoid telling the truth to people, I just don't think they can keep this stuff hidden very well. The alternative media is going to keep pushing it out there. I'm going to encourage you to go to Haywire, that's HEYWIRE.org, and save that as a media site for Washington State. It's not going to be the only one that you should go to, but it's one of the places that you could start to go to find articles about Washington State. Sure, sometimes there's funny articles about robbers breaking into Sasquatch bricks and stealing Legos in University Place, or the Fish and Wildlife being called out to capture a fake alligator that somebody had in a pond in Cowlitz County. So there's some funny stories like that out there. But They also have articles up there frequently about what's going on in Olympia, different corruption issues. I believe that just the simple exposure of what's going on with Jamie Peterson and trying to keep secrets from parents about their kids in school, things like this. As this boils to the top, you're going to want media sources. I find that to be a pretty good aggregating site. I try to help send stuff over to that site too. I encourage you to as well. The more that we can find places to gather information, even if it's just link sites like that or original news sources. I think Brandy Cruz, Ari Hoffman, Jason Rance, Clark County Today. There's a lot of different places around Washington State that's starting to pop up. And we should be paying attention. MyNorthwest.com, I think it's been doing a pretty good job. Center Square has been doing a great job covering news stories in Washington. As the traditional media kind of falls apart, I would encourage you to kind of put together your short list of other places to start paying attention to some of the news stories that are otherwise being ignored. And at the national level, obviously, our local traditional media, like the Seattle Times or Tacoma News Tribune or Tri-City Herald or whatever they are, whatever's left out there, King 5 News, I mean, these places, they're not real media operations. They're just simply there to parrot the, talking points. And obviously, many of these people also probably benefited directly from government grants, whether that's USAID money directly or funneled through 3 cutouts before it got there. Everybody gets a cut of the grift along the way. This kind of information for people to realize, holy cow, we have these problems occurring in our state and they're getting exposed. I think it's a big deal. So anyway, to get back to what Jason was saying there, I hope to be on Todd Herman's show before too long. I'm happy to get there on a show. We'll have to see it. You're reminding me to contact him again and see if I can coordinate something out there before too long. Mateo 79, can we make them pay for violating federal and state constitutions? And the answer to that is not completely. I mean, it really depends on the nature of the violation. It depends on, and I hate to be that Debbie Downer about this, and this is a good question right here, but it's been one that we have asked those of us who are activists and care about property rights and Second Amendment issues and First Amendment censorship issues. There are scenarios, if you have the right attorney and the right set of facts, where you might be able to bring a case where somebody genuinely has a financial impact for abusing your rights. It takes the right set of circumstances to make that happen. You can absolutely make them pay if you actually have a federal Department of Justice that cares about these freedoms and enforcing the law in that way. They would be more impactful than you or I could be, and certainly a lot easier. You also, of course, get the benefit if you remove them from office, and that's still a fairly big deal. If you have the ability to replace your local elected official who doesn't seem to understand what your freedom and rights are, or they believe that your tax dollars are simply a piggy bank for them to use to fund them and their inside grifter operations, to replace people like that is, I think, a pretty significant step in the right direction. So we'll just see how it goes. TZ Burton. Hi, Glenn. How many of the 1,000 pre-filed Democrat bills get signed into law this year? Well, that's a good question. I would guess, I don't know. I would be really surprised if it's more than 150 of those, maybe 200 of them at the most. The reason is that you'll actually have some bills that come in later that are better vetted, or they have more support, or they go a little bit further. I think some of those bills are a little more likely. Some of these bills could become law next year during the next legislative cycle with amendments or changes to them. But if you go look at those 1,000 bills, there's a bunch of them that are very small ball, minor impact type of bills. Those have a higher likelihood of becoming law this year. The more controversial or well-known bills, to those of you and I who are paying attention to this, whether you're on Judy Billings' mailing list or a number of other people that have been sent out those emails detailing which bills are the worst and the problems that exist with them, whether it's CAPER or these other organizations doing that, that pushback tends to change those bills or get them to drop off the agenda at some point in time. That's usually what happens. So I don't know that you're going to see more that I think I would say no more than 200, and probably more than 100, but again, most of them will be bills that you don't even know about or pay much attention to, because not too many people care about whose name is on that bridge, or the name on the freeway, or that we're called officially the Evergreen State, or minor tweaks to obscure parts of RCW 4217A. These kind of things don't tend to get that type of attention. So you'd have to, of the controversial ones, I would guess there's a couple that might make it through. The bigger question is, of those, which ones does Ferguson let stay? I do think he's going to be kind of forced into a situation where he may end up having to exercise the veto pen a little bit more aggressively than people would initially imagine. I could be wrong about that, but I suspect that it's true. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes that's a negotiated ploy that between the governor's office and the Democrats beforehand, just so you know. That is something that happens. Let's see. There's a question that's jumping in here. Alan Mongrel Van Cleve. And by the way, just a quick reminder, try to say @WeTheGovern so I can spot your question. There's a ton of questions that I'm getting as I go through here, or I should say comments, which is great, but I'm having to skim down and find the actual questions. This is a question from Alan Mongrel Van Cleve. Glenn, have you heard of the Convention of Counties movement that is originating from the East Side based on a First Amendment petition, similar to an Article 5 Convention of States? I've heard of the theory. I've never seen it in practice. So if it's actually going anywhere, I'm curious, and I'd like to talk to the people that are launching it. Again, if you've read the article that's still on the front page of my website that I put up a few weeks ago about my concerns about the Convention of States process, it generally would also apply to a convention of counties, presuming that you're talking about redoing the Washington State Constitution. We have a relatively straightforward process to change the Constitution in Washington State. It is used more often than you'll see at the federal level with amendments, and we've had opportunities, and both good and bad over the years, to change the state constitution. Usually bad, but sometimes good. And I don't know how an Article 5 Convention of Counties necessarily changes the same concerns that I have for an Article 5 Convention of States, particularly with the fact that we don't really have in our state the equivalency of the electoral college that we do at a national level. We just don't have that at a state level. So I'd have to find out what they're really doing and find out how serious they are and find out if anybody in that process has thought this through. But I'm always interested in local efforts, especially if you're trying to push for liberty and freedom. And if there's common ground that we can find, I think that's always a good thing. Kevin Bryant, question here. Since the legislature eroded the Parental Bill of Rights, can we start a new initiative, or will the legislature do the same thing? They haven't actually done it yet. They've talked about it. They proposed a bill. It hasn't been done yet. I'm sorry, because there's a tremendous amount of confusion out there. It isn't law until the governor signs it. When it comes out of it requires the legislature, the Senate, to both basically harmonize one bill that lands on the governor's desk. Willfully and with planning, the Founding Fathers of Washington State set up a structure here where getting a bill out of both houses requires a number of steps in the process and an agreement between the two before it even gets to the governor's desk to be vetoed or signed into law. There's no real simple path for that to happen, even on the Parental Bill of Rights attack that the Democrats have been waging over the last few months. The insiders who've been pushing that, right? I'm sure they're filling their oats, but remember, Jamie Peterson got a lot of pushback now. That's really developed a lot of exposure. Now, let's say that they do come through and gut the Parental Bill of Rights, which we know that the Democrat Party of Washington State seems to be pretty much as hostile to parents as I can imagine a political party ever being. And hostile to the children because they're trying to basically separate the children from the parents, and hostile to girls and girls sports because they want boys to be able to beat up on them in the these races and other events out there. And so the challenge, though, changing, I'm going to go back to what you were kind of mentioning there, Kevin, but If the legislature erodes a Bill of Rights, sure, you can start a new initiative, absolutely. And the legislature could, in theory, do the same thing in the future. One of the things that allowed them to make the change at all this year was the fact that they passed it into law last year. It was a victory. And they wanted to use that victory then to go and erode it further. It's an insane hill to die on, I think, for the Democrats in the state, because it doesn't conform to the interests that most people have in the state of Washington, outside of weird eclectic core voters for the Democrats that might be at the Evergreen State College or downtown Bellingham or Seattle and maybe Olympia. Right outside of these really core, hard left kind of Borg groupthink sort of mindsets, most people have a little bit more concern over taking away parental rights. And it's really weird that the Democrats have decided that that's the hill they want to die on. And it's up to us to really keep exposing the truth about it. Gutting that bill is foolish for them. But with politically crazy people and people acting out on the drama that they're experiencing because they think that they might lose some of their grifting operations with the cutbacks in D.C., I anticipate lots of strange and temper tantrumish sort of behavior from the majority party in our state for a little while. T.Z. Burton, with the supermajority for the Democrats, will they solidify a permanent majority in the state? And the answer for that doesn't seem likely. And in fact, if I was to predict anything, I'd say the Democrats probably are going to lose some seats coming up, mainly because the weird listen, I mean, you can take all the bills that the Democrats have proposed. I did a video about this that'll probably be launching this weekend, but you can generally take all the Democrat proposed legislation in Washington state and put it into three basic categories, which essentially defines at least the legislative priority list for the Washington State Democratic Party. So it's not like some obscure Antifa fringe group in downtown Seattle. It's the state Democrat Party through their caucus in the House and the Senate. And they've proposed three categories of bills generally this year. One is raise taxes and increase the grift. Old story for Democrats in the state. Sometimes Republicans jump in and get in on the grift too, but mostly it's been a Democrat priority. What can they do to ensure that they take as much of your money and they either keep some of it for themselves or they feed it out to their grifting friends in their various political constituencies? Old story, common as rain. I mean, these are things like the pay per mile idea, the increasing the property tax agenda, or make it easier to increase property taxes. Other, dumb little bills or ideas that tend to come along that there's never a tax that they don't support. As long as it grows government and rewards their friends, that's what they like. Those things that keep popping up, that's one category. Then you have this other second category, which has to do with public safety, which is essentially the strange focus and obsession the Democrats have had, particularly it's been a trend for the last 20 years, but it's really escalated in the last few years with the more recent members of the Democrat caucus in both houses that have gotten in there. And they seem to be wanting to protect criminals, like whatever they can do to protect violent criminals. Several of the proposed bills and categories of bills that they've gone after, things like, if we're going to save money, let's empty the prisons, right? Let's take the most violent criminals we can and put them right back out on the streets. Now, I'm not saying that bill gets through. I don't think it does. And that happens to be one of the bills I think Ferguson would oppose and probably veto if they passed it. But that's, these proposals, making it so that what was his name? The idea that if you commit a crime with a firearm, that you don't deserve the sentence enhancement from the same people that supposedly don't want gun crime to increase. They're proposing bills that will absolutely guarantee an increase in gun crime, and specifically criminals deciding that there's no downside to using firearms, right? Sometimes there's a downside to using firearms. Criminals will decide that maybe they don't want to bring an illegal firearm with them. It's going to get them an extra 5 years in prison when they go and decide to rob people's properties, because that enhancement has the potential to put them away in the big house for longer than they want to stay. So they make rational decisions at times, and the Democrats continually don't make any rational decisions when it comes to their approach to how they're looking at some of their public safety pieces of legislation. So many of them seem to just reward violent criminals and punish citizens, or certainly make it more risky for us to live here. Then the third category seems to be this grooming kids and keeping secrets. I don't know what time in American history that I can think of that a political party has picked three more obnoxious categories of beliefs and lumped your entire legislative agenda in essentially those three buckets: increasing taxes and the grift, punishing citizens, rewarding criminals, and the grooming kids and keeping secrets agendas. Man, if those are the hills you're going to die on politically, I don't necessarily understand it, but I'll accept that that's what the Democrat Party stands for today, and they've demonstrated with the receipts that they're giving us on the piece of legislation that they're proposing. So I just don't think that's a path to political success or future, even in Washington State and outside of, again, downtown Seattle and a couple of college towns in our state. I don't think that that's going to go very far, but that's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so, though, and it's just this weird world that we're observing right now. Here is another question. Again, lots of commentary here, which is great. I'm just trying to find the questions. Lon W., is there any chance in the future that we could get property tax relief? I'm retired. My 1,700 square foot Maple Valley home went up $1,096 for 2025, about 20% in taxes. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with the need to find a way to reduce property taxes, in particular in Washington State. And the way they're doing this is they're inflating the property valuations and therefore increasing the amount that you owe that way. That's been kind of their backdoor way of increasing it beyond the physical increase from, they're talking about changing it from a 1% increase a year to 3%, but maximum increase that they'd be allowed to have without going to the citizens. But as I still think the California reform was actually a pretty legitimate reform in property tax assessment. Back in the day, I can't remember the proposition it was now, but it basically said that whatever the valuation of your property when you bought it, it stays at that valuation essentially for future tax calculations until you sell it. And then it's going to sell at a new level, and that sets the new property tax value based on what you've sold at. That allows people to retire in homes that they buy when, even after their income drops below what they were getting paid and they were working full time. The property tax assessment process is really terrible. So anyway, that's just very important, and I think it's very critical that we focus on that. So Lon, I feel your pain. I live in Thurston County. My taxes are not as high as yours on a property tax level, but I ran for the assessor's office years ago in 2010. And really the short story on that was just that my dad had been appealing his property taxes on his property next door to mine, a little ways away, and he had prevailed in his property tax appeal 9 years in a row, and he was getting ready to do it again for the 10th year, and they were just going to simply elect the same clown that's been in there incorrectly assessing the property taxes for the previous decade. And so I ran on a platform that even government should be able to get it right once a decade. Which is about the highest level of competency I can almost ever expect at any level of government, but to be able to get it right once every decade isn't too much to ask for. And I think that that would make an impact if we could really reduce property taxes in Washington State. That would really improve the quality of life here. But we would also need to probably reassess the entire tax structure in our state. I think any kind of income or capital gains tax is terrible. I think B&O tax is really foolish. User taxes tend to be the safest sort of taxation that impact the day-to-day population the least. But we also need to shrink the size of government because the underlying bloat of the administrative state that we have here is bloated equivalently, probably the same proportions that we see back in D.C., and so just not the same number of zeros after the numbers. And we really have a lot of work to do to clean that up. I would love to. It's about the only job in government I would want is if I could go and be the equivalent of the Washington State DOGE project that you see in D.C. here in our state. I would love that. I'm that guy. That's the thing I'd want to do. A lot of opportunity to downsize here in our state. Let's see. There's a question here from Kevin Bryant. Again, thanks for hitting the @ We the Govern. It's easier to spot that question there. And do you know anything about the all-volunteer DOGE for Washington State? I heard the Hoffather tweeting about it. I'm assuming you mean Ari Hoffman, but no, I actually don't specifically. But obviously, I'm going to feed them whatever information I have when I have an opportunity to do so. I think they're doing the hardest work first, which is this big hit back in D.C. What I do see happening from the DOGE cutbacks that are already been announced is about a $300 million reduction in grants coming to Washington State. It's very possible that they end up cutting off billions of dollars a year that would otherwise be coming to Washington State, which most of it's wasted and squandered on dumb things. Within that, though, there's very possible that there's legitimately significant and value-added investments of some kind that makes sense, supporting wildfire services, maybe in some cases, dealing with stuff at the nuclear cleanup at the Hanford site, maybe other types of specific projects that would make sense that the feds would actually want money to go to that specific stuff. It's just that most of it's been diluted by a floodwater tsunami of other terrible bad ideas that all of our tax dollars are getting squandered there, and picking out those good ideas that should be funded from the ocean of bad ideas that are currently being funded is probably no easy task. But cutting it all off, and as I think even Musk was interviewed, he said they're going to make mistakes. They will. The left is going to focus on those mistakes, but the mistakes on balance compared to the massive waste that they're uncovering should allow us to go back and find and invest in maybe a couple of those projects that make sense. But the lion's share of it doesn't need to come back. It's all a waste, and I think it's pretty good. Let's see, Kelly, somebody's asking if this is a space to say Trump or don't say Trump, red or blue. Well, I don't even know why that's a question. I say Trump all the time, but I mostly focus on Washington State. And red or blue doesn't matter as much to me, although I am a conservative guy, and I probably lean on the libertarian side of things at times. Definitely a property rights and pro-2A guy. Always have been for a long, long time, going back many years, and pretty well documented on all those issues. But so I don't have any kind of restraint on what you want to make comments on, but I'd prefer the questions to probably be more focused on Washington State. That's probably the audience that's watching this live stream right now mainly. And I don't consider myself an expert on anything in DC. And most of the work that I do is focused in our state. So sometimes I help with activists in other states as well, but most of our focus is here. Let's see. Let's keep going down here. Jason Fisher, here you go. We got a question. And now I'm seeing there's a bunch of other questions coming up here, guys. Okay, I'll try my best to get to these. Will Washington try to mandate semi-automatic rifles to have fixed magazines like Colorado? P.S. Thanks, I didn't catch that I misspelled the "had to be the government." Yeah, that's fine. Will they try that? Maybe, but all these states, Colorado, California, Oregon, Illinois, New York, all these states kind of are looking at each other, Connecticut sometimes, or Massachusetts. They all kind of look at each other and see which dumb idea somebody gets away with there, and they can try to imitate it. Those who hate the Second Amendment and the ability to defend yourself, they continually seem to recirculate back into that. Here's the thing I've always believed, just from the evidence that I've seen and talking to people involved in kind of at the ground game level, I don't believe the anti-Second Amendment movement has a lot of grassroots support behind it. I just don't. It's always been an elitist kind of push from insiders who are tied into usually well-funded interests. Before George Soros was around, it was the Dan Brady kind of push that was going on back then. Before that, it was a little bit less organized officially around other kind of general movements like in the 70s and the 60s when you had some of the hostility to the Second Amendment back then. But there's a strong grassroots movement that actually is probably stronger now than it's ever been and growing more all the time, that's very much in favor of protecting the Second Amendment. And when we see how many billions of dollars were funneled through U.S. aid going back into these Soros anti-gun groups, and then in turn coming back and being used in our country to take away our freedoms on the Second Amendment side of things in various states around the country, and that money's been cut off now. My gut tells me that the big push for a lot of the hostility towards Second Amendment is going to probably fade away in some ways. There just won't be the money to fund these goofballs that came out like during the 1639 initiative process. Guys that are just pathological psychopaths, right? They just lie. They don't, nothing about themselves is true. They're basically trained to go out and just lie to public audiences, and then once they get their agenda through, they just disappear. You never see them again. Everything they said about who they were was a lie. They disappear and they become somebody else in another state. I think that only exists because those people are paid well and they're financed well, and when they can't get that stuff around and they can't kick back the cash to the politicians to support these ideas, you just don't have as many people doing it. So that's what I see going on right now. Lots of questions. Okay, now I'm into a batch of questions. Oh, here, first, I missed this one, guys, but Chuck Connor, I've heard about Olympia wanting to increase property taxes by 3 times. Any info on that? That is referring to, and it's probably the most at-risk tax proposal from my perspective that Olympia has going on today, because there were other dumb ideas proposed. There was like a wealth tax idea that just, it's not possible to implement it, so that one died. There's some other dumb tax ideas that don't have any kind of infrastructure to support them, so they are so difficult to implement that in many cases the Democrats just don't, they let it die on the vines because they got other things they're going to fight on. But unfortunately, the property tax is the one that I think has the highest risk of being able to move forward. Now, they're not trying to increase property taxes by 3%. What they're trying to do is modify the restricted amount that you and I and other taxpayers voted for in the state 20 some odd years ago, that said we want them to restrain and restrict the increases in property taxes by no more than 1% a year. That'd be the maximum. If you want to increase it more than that, you have to go back to the voters and let the voters decide. They have to vote to approve that property tax increase. And the local government, and especially the particularly corrupt governments like King County, San Juan County, other places that can never get, Jefferson County, places where they really can't get enough of your money ever, they've always chafed at this restriction of 1% increase because they could still get new construction, which would reflect the growth of the community. But the truth is the bloat of government exceeds population and inflation every time. And so they eventually were hitting constraints from their mind that they didn't like to have. They wanted to just, and remember before that, before 2001, they could increase it 6% a year without a problem. They had big increases in the past. If you go back and you look through Washington state history, after the initiative process was passed in amendment to the Constitution came through in 1912, and then in the 1920s, there was a series of initiatives for over a decade that people like you and I, 100 years ago, were pushing to restrain and constrain the ability of government to increase property taxes. It has been a long fight. It's always existed. Even when they prevailed, the bureaucracy usually tried to find some way around it. So this fight has been going on a long time. Now, back then, as a percentage of their income, it was probably less impactful. Now we've reached the scale where the bloat of local government, some of it in many places, has gotten so bad and the waste is so obvious that it's become a more significant issue that we probably have to go back and address and constrain. Let's see, Mateo 79 at We the Governed. Some great LawTube channels, it's the YouTube channels, are Washington Gun Law, which is excellent, by the way. Robert Barnes, Viva Fry, and Four Boxes Diner. I'm obviously familiar with Washington Gun Law. I'm less familiar with the other people, but now you make me want to go and look them up and see exactly what they're saying. The more I can find, the better off we are, and there's some good people putting out some good content out there. Scully, how impactful will the Thurston County girls basketball controversy affect the state policy and our state government's willingness to fall in line with the national policies? When you say Thurston County girls, are you talking about North Thurston County? If you could clarify that, because I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about there. I was more familiar with the issues that we've seen in the cross-country, swimming, and track side of things, where boys have been jumping into those races. I was at the state track meet in the spring and witness that boy winning the 400-meter dash, pretending to be a girl, and just seeing girls that have worked their entire life, their entire athletic career, and should have won and did win the 400-meter. They were the first girl across the line, but having a boy step in and take that away from them from Spokane was ridiculous. But I'm not familiar as much with the Thurston County girls basketball controversy, so I need to look that up. Let's see. Ferguson. D. Rambo. Ferguson, last speech. He sees Washington will still go forward without federal funds on trans surgery and climate, et cetera. Will Washington have to hold a new vote on these, since these could raise our taxes? Well, so here's the clarity on this. The trans surgery idea, one of the stupidest political things I've ever imagined in any group ever inventing to decide to die on, from an obscure, weird, and offensive proposal that surveys show somewhere around 80% of people, including in Washington State, find it to be offensive and bizarre. But nevertheless, that's the hill he's decided to die on. And you're right, they're litigating on this at the federal level. I don't know that they're going to prevail in that lawsuit. It seems like a weak case to me and more of a delaying action. You saw it with Ferguson also talking about trying to go back and change birth certificates to modify them in some instantaneous sort of way, which is another weird thing. But when he talks about moving forward without federal funds, he doesn't really need federal funds for the trans surgery stuff. But he does need it on a lot of these other grant grifting operations. And Washington State is financially better off than many other states, but I'm not sure that we can last as long, at least not with the grifting operations they currently have in place, without some of those federal funds. So I don't think it's as easy as Ferguson wants to claim. But it was brave talk by a guy who clearly knows that he's in a difficult position for a variety of reasons. And listen, I mean, let's be honest, Ferguson's office, for 12 years, the Attorney General's office is in the same building the Department of Licensing's in. I think Washington State Department of Licensing should be subject to the same litigation shortly as New York and Illinois are receiving right now. Those are much bigger states, and those are more important litigations in many ways. But I can't see how the Department of Licensing, which has issued driver's licenses to illegals for decades and registered illegal people to vote for a long time as well, how they aren't even more significantly and more obviously in violation of that federal law than those other states that are already in court. And they know this. And the Attorney General's office and the Department of Licensing office has been in the same building for a long time. They share the lobby, they share the parking, they share the elevators, they walk down the hall to each other's offices. They're right there. There's no real separation at all. There's no way that Bob Ferguson was Attorney General for 12 years and wasn't fully and intimately aware of all the illegal activity at the Department of Licensing. So I can't see how he's not, he is aware of this illegal activity. And he knows that they're vulnerable, as everybody who works at the Department of Licensing is also aware of it. They're really just waiting for the next shoe to drop and for a federal lawsuit to occur, especially with the U.S. attorney replacement after they fired the other one in there. I just don't know that Ferguson has really thought through completely, or maybe he has and he's just hoping to put a brave face on it, but I don't think he's thoroughly thought through the outcomes of some of these inevitable exposures. He's tried to hide it for a long time today, but I just don't know that it's gonna last the way that he probably thinks it is, and that's why you see him being a little bit more cautious than some of the more mouth foaming kind of people in the state legislature in his same party. John Hancock right here, good question. Is it possible to do the same intensive review of budgets and spending similar to Trump's review to find and prosecute those criminals stealing and wasting tax money? It is, except what you don't have is either a majority in the legislature or certainly in any of the executive offices right now in our state who want to see those changes made. You could probably expose a lot of them. My experience in the past is that when you expose them, what they do is they simply go back and try to change the statute to make it harder for you to find the truth about what's going on with finances. There's been no group of people more hostile to the Public Records Act than the state Democrat Party in recent years. That wasn't always true, but it is true now. And the grifting operations that kind of feed off of the tax dollars that are funneled out to these grant systems they are also hostile to the Public Records Act, and they want all this information concealed because it's easier to steal money or to waste money in darkness than it is to do it in the light of day where everybody knows that you're doing it. So we'll have to see where that goes, but that's the operation I would like to do here. To do it as efficiently as it looks like they're doing in DC, we would need some outside specialists to come in. You're really looking at, I think, the use of effective AI programs to dig stuff up in the financial side of things. One of the, and I hadn't thought about this really about Musk until they started coming out with some of the stories with DOGE after January 20th, was the fact that his PayPal background actually gave him a pretty good structural knowledge of how you would actually go in and look at financial, large and complex and small financial transactions on a big scale, big database sort of world. And then with the work that he's done with his AI program and investments, marrying those two, one is just a knowledge and experience of what to look for, and the other one is tools to help you be able to deal with very complex, large data sets to pull out patterns and identify problems. This isn't as easy as it sounds. It's the same issue that we've had to deal with when we're looking at the Washington Voter Research Project, where we're digging into problems with the voter rolls. It's one of the things that AI has actually come out as we're developing tools that are it's more effective now to dig up and identify like fake voters or people that don't exist. What the reaction of those people on the inside has been is they go and they simply change the law so that we can no longer get information that's as usable or as honest as it was before, because now they realize that somebody can actually go in and get that data and find the truth. An example of this was the stories a little bit before my time, and as far as before my time when I was involved in Washington state issues lately. And this was when they were identifying the fact the Department of Licensing was registering illegals and people who are not U.S. citizens to vote. And this was discovered by a group of activists, 2004, 2005 timeframe, 2006. And they were basically going through, what happens is when you're a registered voter, you're put on the jury pool list. And then it was a public record as to why you didn't serve on the jury. So you could get your jury summons, and if you weren't a U.S. citizen, instant disqualification for being on a jury. So when people who were registered to vote, not U.S. citizens, got their request to be on the jury, they would say, "Hey, listen, I can't do it. Nobody wants to be on the jury." So it was a convenient excuse. I'm not a U.S. citizen. I shouldn't be on this list. And so the activists at the time pulled those lists, the jury lists, and the jury rejection lists. I don't think that's the right term, but it's basically the term that people use, the collected reason why people were rejecting being on the jury. And they were showing, listen, there's thousands of people here, hundreds, thousands of people that are registered to vote illegally in Washington state, and this is absolutely proof. So then what the Democrats did is they went in and they changed the public records law so you could no longer get access to the rejection reasons of the jury pool list. So that's what they do. They do it all the time. They're doing it to us in the Washington Voter Research Project, where they change the voter rolls so that you can no longer see birth dates, for example, and the data tracking is a little bit harder to do. They're trying to do it right now with preventing people from having the ability to appeal illegal people off the voting rolls, because we were effective in doing that in a number of different counties. And so now the auditors don't want to be exposed for their incompetence and corruption and just failures to do their own job. And so they want to change the law to make it so that you can't do it. That's how government works. It's how it's always worked. It's how it always will work until you have a dramatic change in what's going on. Oh, man. Okay, guys, I've got a number of questions, and I'm pushing my time, but it's been a little while, so I'll give you a little bit more time on this, and let's hammer through a couple of these last questions. There's some good ones here. Mike Wolfdog, did you see the video of the King County Sheriff saying they will not follow the federal law as far as illegal immigrants and deportations unless they commit some serious crime? Did not see the video. I heard the story. I am aware of that. Remember, King County Sheriff is the only sheriff in Washington State of the 39 counties in Washington State that's not elected. That's what you get when you have an appointed sheriff. They will rule, they will always be beholden to their political masters. And in King County, if you have any guess as to what those political masters are, they're always going to tell them to follow those rules, and they will not be beholden to the Constitution or the voters in the same way that an elected sheriff would be. I would consider this Exhibit A and why we don't want appointed sheriffs compared to elected sheriffs. D. Rambo, thank you for answering my question. I love your reply. Phil Ferguson was a little shaky addressing the Washington people. Yes, he is. He's not an idiot. He may be corrupt. He may be dishonest. He may be a crook. But I do think he's not an idiot, and I think it's mistaken for people to think that he is. He's not as smart as he thinks he is, but he's not as dumb as many of his political partners that he's having to deal with. And so he's really, he's probably having to walk a pretty awkward line. Let's see. Scully. Okay, you're talking about Tumwater. Sorry, there's another question above you, but I'll jump into this one. I'm sorry I was mistaken in the girls' basketball question. I asked about Tumwater schools, and this is about boys playing against girls. Oh, okay. It's funny. I should be aware of that. I have an exchange student in a Tumwater school, the Tumwater school system right now, and nephew there, so I wasn't even aware of this. I got to dig into it. I'm sorry, Scully. I got to find out what is going on because I do not know. D. Young, here's the question from you. What's the one biggest thing the state of Washington politicians could do to make our state more livable for all, in your opinion? Number one, I would substantially downsize the bureaucracy in the state of Washington. That lumps two things together. Number one, it allows you to reduce taxes. Number two, it allows you to increase the general livability of Washington state by eliminating vast bureaucracies in parasitical organizations that generally provide almost no value and in fact a lot of harm to the state of Washington. When I say that, I'm very explicitly talking about agencies like the Puget Sound Partnership, which could disappear tomorrow and no one would care. Agencies like the Department of Ecology, which could be downsized by about 80%, and again, nobody would notice. You got L&I, Department of Labor and Industries, also another ineffective, highly corrupt agency. You have the early childhood early learning program, elements of DSHS, parts of Fish and Wildlife. You have a lot of these little oversight boards and things that you could really seriously streamline down. Our Department of Transportation operates ineffectively and without effective oversight. There's all kinds of opportunities for downsizing that you could have in the state of Washington. You could do that actually at the same time that you fix and address the Department of Corrections so that they're more efficient and do a better job. You could actually improve the State Patrol so it becomes a law enforcement agency once again and has the type of support that they need to at least be effective and efficient. You could have the Department of Natural Resources run much better than it is now. You could substantially downsize the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And when I say substantial, I'm talking get rid of thousands of people that work there or the ESDs. And you would probably improve childhood learning the more we got rid of them. So anyway, there were some interesting things that I find opportunities exist for us. So if you downsize state government in a lot of ways, you affect a lot of these other things at the same time. And what that would ultimately lead to is just a better quality of life for most people. You pay less money to a wasting, grifting class of parasites, and you maintain a good lifestyle. I love living in Washington State. It's one of the greatest states in America. One of the best places is in North America to live. Despite a bad political class, there's a lot of benefits we have for living here. And so anyway, I just want to make sure that to answer that question to whatever degree I did there, that's about as good as I can do. Listen, guys, I've gone for an hour, and I realize hour and 20 minutes is a little bit longer than what I usually try to do. I tried to keep these to about an hour before I hit that hour and a half point, so I've been stopping there generally. I really apologize for not having an Ask Me Anything live stream over the last couple weeks, and not my intention. In the background, I have been going down some roads to try to explore the possibility of building a new studio that would give me a lot more flexibility and the ability to just do a lot more content where I could do a lot more live streams, a lot more video production. I could help train other activists to also do their own video production. It's been kind of something I've wanted to do. This isn't about building an empire for me. It's been about trying to fix Washington State. And if I can train more activists to do the same thing, it's better for me. It's better for my kids, better for the future if I can just try to do that. And so that's been something, road I'm starting to go down. Obviously, it requires support and finances to do that, but I think that there's just great opportunities that we have to do a better job, or that I have anyway, to do a better job reaching more people out there and providing more value for those who are willing to engage and be interested in this stuff. I hope this was helpful. Please keep making your comments on those bills. It's making a big difference in Olympia. Trust me, it is. I hear it all the time. The Democrats are not happy. The bad guys are not happy generally with the fact that so many of you are making comments. So you may feel like it's a voice in the wilderness, but it does add up and it's making a difference. It's making an impact. Lots of good things going on out there. Lots of bad things too. We'll tell you about both next time we do a live stream. Watch for my 2 videos. I'm particularly curious on what your feelings are about the Department of Licensing video that I put out and my request for some more whistleblowers from that agency, and let me know what you think about that. Otherwise, I'm hoping to be back here next Tuesday, and hopefully this time I'll stay on time. And for the fellow who donated a bunch of that stuff to me for me to be able to do some of my own podcasting, I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to put it to work. I've set it up and I'm missing a couple parts, and I need to get those parts in place before I can do that. So it's not that I've forgotten about you, and I'm not trying to ignore you at all. I'm just running and gunning all the time, and it feels like I'm on a hamster wheel, and there's a lot more to do, and there always is. So looking forward to seeing anybody who might be in Okanagan and Snohomish and Clark and Kitsap and Skagit over the next couple months at some of the events. If you need me to come out and speak at your event as well, please contact me through my website or send me a message, even on my YouTube channel. I'll probably get back to you that way too. Happy to work with anybody out there and do the best that we can to restore liberty and freedom in our state. It starts with you, and it starts with me and helping us get involved with our neighbors and friends. There's a lot of good work that needs to be done, and I really appreciate everybody for logging on today and sharing this video with others. If you don't subscribe and like this, if you don't subscribe to the channel, please do that right now. Probably most of you do if you're on the live stream, but encourage others to as well. It just helps us get more exposure out there. Hope all's well, and I hope that we can continue to make a big impact moving forward. So we'll see you next week.